Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Coming up then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the associate editor of the Daily Mirror, Kevin Maguire, and the parliamentary sketch writer and columnist for The Telegraph, Madeleine Grant. First, though, as ever, let's check out the front pages. The Daily Mail leading with a report from one of its journalists who was on board HMS Defender as Russian warplanes and vessels targeted the Royal Navy warship in the Black Sea. Berlin and Paris propose a reset for EU relations with Moscow. The Financial Times reports that Germany and France have called for closer EU engagement with Russia. The Metro, meanwhile, reports on the conviction of a police officer for killing former footballer Dalian Atkinson. The family of Mr Atkinson have described their pain and relief after a 5-year fight for justice. That's the lead for The Guardian. The Telegraph goes with German Chancellor Angela Merkel demanding EU countries introduce mandatory quarantine for Britons wanting to holiday in Europe this summer. The Health Secretary Matt Hancock faces a major battle to pass a law handing him new powers over the NHS, according to the Eye. The Daily Mirror dedicates its front page to people in the UK who have carried out random acts of kindness over the past couple of years, with the headline, "Thank you." So Kevin Maguire and Madeleine Grant are here. Journalists on this boat, did that help decide what happened, do you think? Or am I being very cynical about this, Kevin, this warship?
Well, I think it did. And the problem for the British government and the Royal Navy is they are basically contradicting what the MOD said, which was essentially nothing happened. Because if you look at the Daily Mail report from Mark Nichol, the defence editor, he talks about crouching by the side of the bridge as Russian warplanes bumped the ship, hearing repeated bursts of cannon fire and the crew frantically putting on flame-retardant suits and body armour. Well, that's very different to the Royal Navy account, which to the MOD, which is essentially going through territorial waters. There was a couple of small Russian ships, some firing far in the distance, which was pre-planned, and the planes are acknowledged. So he's not the only correspondent. Mark Nichol, the BBC's correspondent, has also filed a report, and you can hear the planes. And he seems to have thought it was bigger than the Royal Navy, the MOD, Downing Street, and the UK government says. Not quite the full Russian account, but I think the UK account is called into question.
Crimea is obviously disputed. You might say these waters are disputed, although the British Navy doesn't think so. Who's needling who here, Madeleine?
It's very hard to tell, as always with Russia. I mean, I think the mistake that we make is to sort of take anything that they say or do at face value. I mean, there's various interpretations of what happens. I mean, I think, as Kevin says, the account in the Daily Mail sounds extremely vivid, talk of hour-long cannon fire and, massive concern aboard ship, which does seem a lot more frenzied than the rather neutral account that the MOD gave earlier today. But I mean, there's many possibilities here. It's possible that Russia is testing the UK and NATO to see how they respond. It's possible that they're playing, which is what the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat, alluded to earlier today. He referred to Potemkin-style sabre rattling, playing games perhaps to bolster support domestically. There are numerous possibilities, but I think that the difficulty is trying to reason with what Russia was doing and try to kind of deal with them as if you're dealing with a reasonable opponent that will behave in a rational way.
Yes, and as if the timing couldn't be worse, if we go to the FT, they're reporting that Germany and France have called for closer EU engagement with Russia to build on discussions with Moscow in the wake of US President Joe Biden's Geneva summit with Vladimir Putin. Is he friend or foe, Kevin?
He's a bit of both, isn't he? But Angela Merkel meets Putin regularly. Germany relies on Russia for a lot of its energy. She has a vested interest in closer relations. Arguably, we all have a vested interest in at least talking and trying to get along. But you can't just ignore the human rights violations in Russia. You can't ignore the threats around the world from Russia. But it is better to talk, as Biden decided when he held that summit last week with Putin. But it's interesting, though, you read that FT account, Merkel seems to have got Macron involved. The Italians may be involved too. But the European Union, while Merkel and the others may want a closer relationship, the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, and Poland, for instance, which were part of the Soviet Union not very long ago, which was dominated by Russia, they're rather concerned. So there will be big pressures in the European Union. But I think Biden has just made that move, which will look for a reset. But here in the UK, we'll remember the Salisbury poisonings, and of course Crimea itself, the annexation, and also the destabilization of Ukraine on its border with Russia. They're not going to go away. They're still big issues, although in truth, the annexation of the Crimea, which was predominantly Russian-speaking, and was only moved into Ukraine, I think, in the 1950s by the Soviet Union as an administrative move. I think Russia's never going to give that up. It's going to be a running sword. It's going to be very difficult for Ukraine. It's going to be very difficult for other countries, but it's just not going to happen. You just cannot see now how Russia will ever withdraw from Crimea. You can't force them to do it militarily, and I don't think it would work economically and diplomatically either.
Well, let's move on. But talking of Germany, let's go to the front page of the Daily Telegraph, which is that the German Chancellor has suggested that all UK citizens who arrive in EU states should be forced to quarantine. Now, this scuppers many a hope of a holiday should the British government change their mind, Madeleine, on letting people go to amber list countries and not quarantining back here.
God, I mean, it's a curious row, isn't it? I mean, I don't remember Angela Merkel quarantining herself when she arrived for the G7 conference a couple of weeks ago. I mean, sorry, Anna, your question was about what we should do with our tourists, whether we should change our guidance yet. I mean, I guess it's too early to say if this is actually going ahead, because although Angela Merkel has called for it, it's not yet policy, and it's likely to create, or at least it's not yet EU-wide policy, and it's likely to create considerable disagreement within the Schengen zone, because countries like Spain and Greece rely heavily on UK tourism, and they're going to be very reluctant to impose these sorts of measures, and they can't be forced to by the EU. So I think it's a little early to say whether we should change our guidance to reflect this latest statement from Angela Merkel.
Yes, and two issues they say here. New EU-wide rules will be introduced next week to facilitate the resumption of travel, which will allow vaccinated people to move freely within the Schengen area. And here in the UK, they suggest Merkel's intervention coming ahead of a key meeting at which ministers are expected to approve plans for fully vaccinated citizens to be able to travel to amber list countries. So when is this meeting, Kevin, and what is likely to be decided?
Well, we should get a decision tomorrow on which countries will move, if any at all, and green, amber, and red. There will be an announcement. There's been a lot of speculation. That's certainly the islands of Greece and Spain, which have very low rates, may actually be opened up and put on the green list, and not entire countries. But there's a lot of speculation. You never quite know until you get the decision, because the way these calls are made is shrouded in mystery, and I think there's a lot of politics involved in it. Whether the government thinks you could open up some and not others, and what messages does that send. But Angela Merkel certainly trying to put a spanner in the works there. But I think she would lose out in the European Union, because, as Madeleine said, Spain and Greece are desperate to have British tourists visiting, as are Portugal, Malta, and a number of the other countries. But you can see now we're edging towards opening up, and maybe we'll have to wait until the July 19th announcement on what the future of restrictions in England from Boris Johnson to see what happens with holiday plans, because there have been reports of a dispute with some ministers wanting to open up in July, others wanting to hold back until August. But I feel when you look at the opinion polls, the majority of people seem to put defeating the virus above going back on holiday. But when we saw those figures that so few people who've been going to amber countries when they come back have tested positive, it's a tiny number. You might be more at risk now going off to Blackburn or Bolton than you would be to parts of Greece or Spain. So it's going to get harder and harder to keep that all those restrictions on travel. And we saw the protests in London today from people in the travel industry. It's a huge industry, a lot of jobs, a lot of value there. So it's not just about people wanting to go on holiday, it's also about a key part of the economy.
Yeah, I think they said 195,000 jobs, didn't they? And many of them operating with 10% of their income, but having to not furlough their staff because they're constantly having to change their customers' plans. So they have neither furlough nor income, which is absolutely devastating for them. But yes, you're right, the day of protests, many people saying, why are we quibbling about sending people to countries with lower rates than ours? You know, it's Europe that doesn't want the Delta variant, which takes us to the FT as well, Madeleine, on a related issue, which is the sort of hypocrisy of allowing all these VIPs, fans, to come to Wembley when travel is effectively on hold for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, I think, rather like the G7 conference caused a lot of people to feel aggrieved at the way that they could see the rules being flouted by the big dogs. This news about the special rules for UEFA VIPs is precisely the thing that's going to spark disenchantment. It's that this was actually a key issue that many of the people at the protest outside Parliament, the representatives of the travel industry, the point that they were making there. And I think after, it's a kind of, ever since the Barnard Castle incident, there's been a real sense of, and I think it is often underestimated by politicians who need to think more carefully about how things look and seem to the public, who are, have been putting up with these restrictions for a very, very long time. It cuts through in a way, that idea of one rule for us, another for them, really annoys people in a way that I think sometimes the politicians are a bit surprised by.
Yeah, the G7 beach party was one of those as well, for some people, I know. Madeleine, Kevin, stay there. Lots more still to come, including more on the first face-to-face meeting between the Prime Minister and the monarch in more than a year. More on that to come.